I need you to stay calm, okay? The doctors are with Everin right now. You don't need me there." Those were the last words my husband said before he got on a plane to go skiing in Whistler with his friends. At the very same time, our 11-month-old baby boy was burning with a very high fever and lying in a small bed in the children's emergency ward. I didn't cry when he said that. I didn't beg him to stay. I didn't shout. I simply hung up the phone. Then I looked at my baby boy lying in the hospital crib. His tiny face was red from the fever, and he looked so tired. In that quiet moment, while machines beeped softly around us, I made a promise to myself. I promised that I would never forget this moment. My name is Amara. I am 29 years old. I grew up in Mississauga, Ontario, in a home where my parents worked very hard every day. We did not have everything we wanted, but we had what mattered. My parents respected each other. They spoke kindly to one another. Even when they disagreed, they tried to listen and understand. My mother often told me something when I was growing up. She said the person you choose to spend your life with is very important. That person will either lift you up and make your life brighter, or slowly make you feel empty inside. For many years, I did not want to believe that I had chosen the wrong person. I met my husband, Cale, when I was 24 years old. Cale was charming and confident. When he walked into a room, people noticed him right away. He had a strong voice and an easy smile. He knew how to make people laugh, and he always seemed sure about everything he did. At first, I admired that about him. We dated for 2 years. During that time, things felt exciting and new. We went out to dinner, watched movies, and talked about our future. Then Cale proposed to me. When I was 26, we got married in a small and beautiful ceremony outside Niagara-on-the-Lake. Our families were there, along with a few close friends. I remember standing there in my dress, feeling hopeful and excited. I believed I was starting a wonderful new life. At that time, I truly thought I was happy. Or maybe I simply had so much hope that I confused hope with happiness. The first year of our marriage was fine. It was not perfect, but it was okay. Cale worked in corporate finance in downtown Toronto. His job required long hours, and I understood that. Many people work long hours when they want to succeed. I worked as a graphic designer for a medium-sized company. I liked my job. I liked using my creativity and solving problems with design. It also made me feel proud to have something that belonged only to me. But when I became pregnant with Everin, things started to change in small ways. At first, the changes were very quiet. Cale began making small comments. They were not big enough to start a fight, but they happened often enough that they slowly hurt my feelings. For example, if the apartment was not perfectly clean when he came home, he would run his finger along the kitchen counter and raise his eyebrow. He wouldn't even say anything sometimes. That small look was enough to make me feel like I had failed. If dinner was not ready when he arrived, he would sigh loudly and say something like, "I've been working since 7 this morning." He said it in a way that made it sound like I had spent the entire day relaxing. But the truth was very different. I was 30 weeks pregnant. I still took the subway to work every morning. I worked all day, then came home and cooked dinner and cleaned the apartment. But somehow my effort never seemed to count. There is one evening I remember very clearly. I had spent extra time cooking that night. I made shepherd's pie from scratch. I carefully prepared the potatoes and the filling. I set the table nicely and even lit a candle because I thought it would make dinner feel warm and special. Cale came home and dropped his work bag in the hallway like he always did. He never placed it where it belonged. It was always left for me to move later. He sat down at the table and looked at the food. Then he said, "My mother makes hers with a proper crust on top. Did you forget the breadcrumbs?" I didn't answer him. I didn't argue. I simply picked up my fork and quietly ate my dinner. When Everin was born in March, the delivery was very difficult. I was in labor for 16 hours. The epidural medicine they gave me only worked a little, so I still felt much of the pain. In the end, the doctors had to use special tools to help pull the baby out safely. After the birth, I was in pain for weeks. For 3 weeks I could barely sit comfortably. Cale was there during the birth, and I was grateful for that. But once we came home from the hospital, something became very clear. Cale had a limit when it came to helping. He liked holding Everin when the baby was clean, calm, and smiling. But when Everin cried during the night, needed feeding, had stomach pain, or when piles of laundry appeared, all of that responsibility fell on me. I took my full maternity leave. In Canada, mothers can take up to 12 months off to care for their newborn babies. Even though things were difficult with Cale, I was thankful for that time because it allowed me to focus on Everin. Those months with my son were precious. During Evren's naps, I started a small blog. It wasn't anything serious or famous. I simply wrote about being a first-time mom. I shared small stories about our daily life, recipes I was trying, and sweet little moments from our walks in the neighborhood. Writing helped me feel calm. It gave me a quiet space where I could express my thoughts. It felt like something that truly belonged to me. Across the street from our house lived a woman named Isolde Carver. Isolde was in her early 50s. She was always dressed very neatly and looked elegant, even when she was just stepping outside to check her mailbox. But what stood out most about Isolde was her warm and kind personality. She had a way of making people feel comfortable. For months, we only waved to each other from across the street. Then one afternoon in October, Evren and I were walking outside. Evren suddenly threw his stuffed rabbit toy. It flew through the air and landed on Isolde's lawn. She picked it up and handed it back to me. Smiling, she said, "He has excellent aim." The toy had landed almost 6 feet away. We both laughed. Then we started talking. After a few minutes, Isolde invited me inside for tea. That simple moment changed more in my life than I realized at the time. Little by little, Isolde became one of the most important people in my life. She never judged me. She never pushed me to do anything. She simply listened when I talked about my life. Sometimes she asked thoughtful questions. Sometimes she shared gentle advice. Once she told me something that stayed in my mind. She said, "A woman who carries that much on her own doesn't always have to." At that time, I didn't fully understand what she meant. I only knew that after spending an hour talking with Isolde, I felt lighter and calmer. It felt like breathing fresh air after being stuck in a small room all week. Cale barely noticed Isolde. He never joined me when I spoke with neighbors. He thought that kind of thing was boring. So in his mind, Isolde was simply the woman across the street. He didn't know her last name. He didn't know her husband. He didn't know anything about her life because he had never cared enough to ask. As winter arrived and Evren was almost 11 months old, something began to change inside our home. Cale seemed more distant than before. Or maybe he was simply more dismissive. It was hard for me to tell the difference. He started going out with his work friends more often. He came home later at night. And when he was home, he spent most of his time on his phone. Sometimes he said he was checking work messages, but many times he was just scrolling through things that had nothing to do with work. The weekend when everything happened started on a Thursday evening. We were eating dinner when Cale suddenly told me that he and 4 friends from his office had booked a ski trip to Whistler. They were leaving on Saturday morning. I stared at him in surprise. "This Saturday?" I asked. "Yeah," he replied casually. "Trevor found a good deal on a chalet. We're staying for 3 nights. I looked at him carefully. "Evren has had a runny nose all week," I said. Cale shrugged. "Kids always have runny noses in the winter," he replied. "He'll be fine." But Evren did not only have a runny nose. For 2 days he had been slightly warm. He was fussier than usual and was not eating as much as he normally did. I had already called our family doctor's office. They told me to watch Evren carefully and bring him in if his fever increased or if he became very tired. I had told Cale all of this earlier. He had heard me. He simply decided that it was not important. "I'm not comfortable with you leaving right now," I said honestly. "Can you move the trip to next weekend?" Cale set his fork down. "I already paid a non-refundable deposit," he said. "How much was the deposit?" I asked. "That's not the point," he replied. "I think that is the point," I said quietly. He looked at me with an expression I knew too well. It was patient but also slightly condescending, like he was explaining something to a child. "Amara," he said, "you've been on maternity leave for almost a year. You're home every day. Taking care of one sick baby for a few days is not a big crisis." That night I barely slept. Evren woke up twice during the night. When I got up to feed him the 3rd time, I noticed that his body felt warmer than before. I took his temperature. It showed 38.3. It wasn't extremely high yet, but it was clearly rising. I sent Cale a message while sitting in the nursery. He did not reply until the morning. When he finally answered, his message said, "Probably teething. Kids run warm when they're teething." Cale is not a doctor. Saturday morning arrived. I checked Evren's temperature again. This time it was 38.9. I checked it twice to be sure. Evren was unusually quiet. Normally he babbled happily and played with his toys. But that morning he only made soft, weak sounds. That worried me more than the number on the thermometer. I stood in the kitchen while Cale carried his duffel bag to the car. I told him again that I was concerned. "His temperature is almost 39, I said. "I might need to take him to Sick Kids Hospital." Kale paused in the doorway. He looked at me. Then he looked at Everin sitting quietly in his baby chair. He's fine, Kale said. Call the health line if you're worried. I'll have my phone on me. Your phone was with you last night too, I reminded him. Then he left. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, Everin's fever had climbed to 40.1. He no longer wanted to be put down. He held tightly onto me and pressed his face against my neck, making small, tired sounds. I called Telehealth Ontario and explained everything carefully. The nurse on the phone listened closely. Then she told me to take Everin to the emergency department immediately because of his age and the high fever. While driving to the hospital, I called Kale. He answered after 4 rings. I could hear a loud wind and people talking in the background. They were already on the ski slopes. His fever is 40.1, I said. I'm taking him to the emergency room right now. There was a short pause. Okay, Kale said. Keep me posted. Kale, I said firmly. I need you to come home. Another pause followed. Then he replied calmly. Amara, by the time I book a flight and get back to Toronto, it will already be midnight. You'll probably be discharged from the hospital by then anyway. The doctors will take care of him. He is our son. I know he is our son, and he will be okay. You are already at the hospital. The doctors are helping him right now. I just need you to stay calm. Okay. The doctors were with Everin, and they were doing their work. They did not need me right beside them anymore at that moment. And that was it. I walked into the emergency room for sick children all by myself. I was holding my little baby, Everin, who was only 11 months old. In my other hand, I carried a diaper bag filled with the things he might need. The hospital was bright and quiet at the same time. I walked up to the front desk and told the person there that my baby had a very high fever. A nurse with very kind eyes looked at us and quickly brought us into a small triage room. Because Everin was still so little and his fever was high, they did not make us wait very long. The nurse asked me many questions. She asked about Everin's temperature, when the fever started, and if he had been eating or drinking. I answered every question as carefully as I could. I told her everything I knew about how Everin had been feeling that day. I also signed several forms that the hospital needed. While I was doing all of this, Everin was sitting on my lap. His little body felt so warm from the fever. He pressed his hot face against my chest as if he wanted to hide there. Before we were called into the room, there had been a woman sitting beside me in the waiting area. She kept glancing at me in a gentle and worried way. It was the kind of look people give when they can see that someone is having a very hard moment. After a few minutes, she reached into her bag and handed me a small pack of tissues. She did not say anything at all. Only when she handed them to me did I realize that tears had been quietly falling down my face. I had not even noticed that I was crying. What happened next was something I never expected. While we were sitting in the triage room waiting for the main doctor to come, I suddenly heard a voice outside the curtain. Excuse me, the voice said politely. I was told my neighbor was brought in, a young woman with a baby. A moment later the curtain slowly opened. Standing there was Isolde. I stared at her in surprise. How did you know? I asked. Isolde stepped inside and gently placed her hand on my back. I saw you putting Everin's car seat into your car earlier, she explained. You were alone and Kale's car wasn't there. She looked at me kindly. I called your phone, but it went to voicemail. So I got worried and decided to drive here to check on you. Then she looked down at Everin and softly touched his tiny hand. I'm here now, she said. Tell me everything. Isolde stayed with me at the hospital for 4 whole hours. When the nurses needed me to sign more papers, she carefully held Everin so my hands would be free. At one point, she quietly went to the hospital cafe. A little while later, she came back with a cup of tea and a muffin for me. She placed them gently beside me without making a big scene about it. She did not act like she was doing something special. She simply helped in the calmest and kindest way. After some time, the children's doctor came into the room to talk with us. The doctor explained that Everin had a serious ear infection. That infection was causing his high fever and making him feel so sick. Because Everin was still very young, the doctors wanted to keep him at the hospital overnight to watch him closely and make sure he became better. Isolde listened carefully and asked many thoughtful questions. I was so tired and worried that my mind felt empty. I could not even think of what to ask. Later that evening, around 8 o'clock, I sent Kale a message. They are keeping Everin in the hospital tonight, I wrote. He has an ear infection and a high fever. The doctors want to monitor him. Kale replied about 40 minutes later. Okay, he wrote. Let me know how he is in the morning. Hope he sleeps. I stared at the message for a moment. Then I turned my phone face down on the little table beside Evren's hospital bed. I did not touch my phone again for 3 hours. It was almost midnight when Evren finally fell asleep after getting medicine from the nurses. He was lying in a small hospital crib with soft blankets. I sat beside him in a hard vinyl chair in the dimly lit hospital room. The hallways outside were quiet. Isolde had already gone home earlier that night, so I could have some quiet time with Evren. But she had been sending me messages every hour just to check if we were okay. Around midnight she sent one last message. "I spoke to my husband tonight," she wrote. "He wants to help however he can. Try to get some rest. We are not going anywhere." At that moment I did not fully understand how important those words would become later. The next morning things looked a little better. The antibiotics had started to work, and Evren's fever was slowly going down. He still looked tired and wanted to stay very close to me. But he opened his dark little eyes and reached out to hold my finger. When he wrapped his tiny fingers around mine, something inside me suddenly felt very clear and strong. I had spent the entire night sitting alone in a hospital chair with my sick baby while my husband was away skiing. And in that moment I knew something inside me had changed. Cale came home on Sunday evening. He walked through the door carrying his ski bag. His cheeks were a little red from the cold wind on the mountain. "How is he?" Cale asked. I told him that Evren had stayed in the hospital overnight and that he was now home resting and taking antibiotics. Cale nodded and shrugged a little. "See," he said. "The doctors handled it. I knew he would be fine. You managed it." I looked at him quietly. "I shouldn't have had to manage it alone," I said. Cale looked confused. He truly looked like he did not understand why I was upset. That confused look hurt me more than anger would have. It showed that he either did not understand what he had done, or he believed that it did not really matter. That night I did not argue with him. I simply stayed quiet. I put Evren to bed and made myself something small to eat. Cale sat in the living room watching television like nothing unusual had happened. Meanwhile, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and a pen. Then I started writing. I wrote down every moment I could remember when Cale had not been there for us. Every comment that hurts. Every time he chose something else instead of his family. I wrote dates when I could remember them. Little by little I filled page after page. By the time I stopped, I had written 4 full pages. 3 weeks later, something happened that became the final turning point. And it came from a place Cale had never even noticed. Isolde's husband was someone important. For a few months I had known that he was the regional managing partner of one of the biggest commercial law firms in Ontario. His name was Alaric Carver. Isolde had told me about it quietly one afternoon while we were having tea during the summer. She gently asked me not to mention it to Cale. She had seen enough of Cale's personality to know that it might create an uncomfortable situation. I respected her request and never said anything. Cale had absolutely no idea who our neighbors really were. What Cale also did not know was that his own company had recently hired Alaric's law firm to help review a very large business merger. Alaric was not just another lawyer working on the case. He was the lead lawyer in charge. Isolde had told Alaric about the night I spent in the hospital with Evren. I had not asked her to tell him, but she did. Later she told me that Alaric had been quietly very angry when he heard the story. He was not a loud man who shouted, but he believed strongly in fairness and responsibility. His anger was calm but very serious. Around the same time, I had also begun speaking with my own lawyer. Her name was Zephra Lior. Someone from a women's support network online had recommended her. I told Zephra everything about my situation. I showed her the 4 pages of notes I had written. She listened carefully and calmly. She did not tell me what I must do. Instead, she explained my options and allowed me to choose for myself. When I told her about Isolde and Alaric, she paused and thought for a moment. Then she said gently, "That information is important, but your case is strong even without it. Do not depend on it." I respected her honesty. I did not want things to work in my favor simply because of who my neighbor's husband was. I wanted to make my decisions clearly and for the right reasons. But some events started happening that I could not control. It all began with the woman in the hospital waiting room. The same woman who had given me the tissues that night. Later I discovered that she had a parenting account on Instagram where she shared stories about family life. Many people followed her page. That night at the hospital had stayed in her mind. She had seen me sitting there alone with my sick baby, sending messages and waiting for replies that did not come. The moment had touched her heart deeply. Later she wrote a thoughtful post about what she had witnessed. She did not use my name. She simply described seeing a young mother alone in a hospital with a sick child while clearly frightened and unsupported. She wrote about how painful it can be when one parent carries all the responsibility while the other one is missing. Her post was shared by many people. It spread from one person to another across social media. Eventually someone tagged a friend. That friend knew Kale. And before long, the story made its way to Kale's office. I only found out about everything because one of Kale's coworkers sent him a screenshot of a message. The coworker believed Kale would want to know what people were saying. Kale came to me holding his phone in his hand. His face looked different from how it usually looked. I had never seen that expression on him before. He looked embarrassed, confused, and worried all at the same time, like someone trying to hide a mistake, but not knowing how. He showed me the phone and asked, "Did you tell someone about the hospital?" I calmly replied, "No, I didn't post anything." He looked at the screen again and said, "Someone wrote something about you online." I shrugged slightly and said, "Maybe someone saw what happened and felt like they should talk about it. That was their decision. I didn't ask anyone to do it." Kale slowly sat down in the chair. The room became quiet for a moment. For the first time in our entire marriage, I watched Kale sit there without knowing what to say. He was always someone who liked to control every situation and every conversation. But this time he seemed lost. During the next few weeks, things in Kale's life started to slowly fall apart. Kale had always depended on looking confident and strong in front of others. He cared a lot about his image at work and about what people thought of him. But now something has changed. The story that people saw was no longer the story he wanted them to see. Some of his coworkers had already seen the online post. People started whispering about it. His manager began asking him questions about his choices and his judgment. Those conversations made Kale uncomfortable. Alaric, the senior lawyer who worked with Kale's company on an important business deal, also heard about what happened. Alaric didn't say anything directly to Kale, but he became quiet and distant. Before, he had always been warm and friendly with Kale. Now he kept his distance. People who paid attention to small details could easily notice the change. Kale was not fired from his job, and I want to be honest about that. But he did not receive the promotion he had been expecting for a long time. That promotion meant a lot to him, and he had worked hard hoping to get it. Instead, the opportunity quietly passed to someone else. There were also meetings and important discussions happening at work where Kale was no longer invited. Decisions were being made without him being included. The professional cost was real, even if it was not complete. Soon after all of that, Kale received divorce papers. Zephra managed the entire process. She worked with calm confidence and clear thinking. She knew exactly what steps to take and how to protect my rights and Evren's rights. I admired the way she handled everything. Watching her made me feel stronger. At first, Kale tried to resist the divorce. He argued and said it was unnecessary. Then he tried to bluff, acting like the situation was not serious. Finally, he called me directly. I answered the phone while sitting in Zephra's office. Zephra was sitting beside me, and we had a recording device running. In Ontario, recording a phone call is legal if one person on the call knows about it. Kale started talking in a frustrated voice. He said I was making a huge mistake. He told me I was overreacting about what he called just one ski weekend. He said he had always worked hard to provide for our family. He insisted that I didn't understand how much pressure and responsibility he carried for us. I listened quietly while he spoke. When he finished, I spoke in a calm and steady voice. "Kale," I said, "this phone call is being recorded and will be used in our legal case." For a moment, there was complete silence on the phone. Kale didn't say anything. The pause lasted long enough that Zephra looked at me with a small smile of approval. After that, things moved forward much more quickly. The custody arrangement for Evren was decided fairly soon. Kale realized that the evidence created a clear and honest picture of what had happened. The hospital admission record, the telehealth doctor call log, the 4 pages of notes I had carefully written, and the recorded phone call all supported the same story. It was not something that any reasonable person could ignore or misunderstand. Kale agreed that Evren would live primarily with me. Kale would spend time with Evren every other weekend and one weekday evening. Child support was calculated according to the official federal guidelines. In the end, Kale signed the documents. There was one moment later when he tried to argue again. He told me that none of this would have happened if I had not made such a big deal about one ski weekend. I answered him calmly and clearly. None of this would have happened if you had come home when your son was in the hospital. After that conversation, we did not have any more serious discussions. Life slowly moved forward. Evren is now almost 2 years old. He is healthy, cheerful, and full of energy. One of his favorite things in the world is garbage trucks. Whenever he sees one driving down the street, he waves excitedly at it like it is his best friend. I returned to work part-time at my agency. My coworkers welcomed me back with kindness and support. It felt good to step into that part of my life again. I also continued writing my blog. Over time, more and more people began reading it. The audience grew much larger than I ever expected. I never write about kale on the blog. Instead, I write about the things I truly understand now. I write about motherhood. I write about starting life again after a difficult chapter. I write about the quiet strength that comes from building your own life with your own choices. Isolde and Alaric have become very important people in both my life and Evren's life. They care about us deeply and treat us like family. Isolde has a son named Leander. He is 31 years old and works as an architect. Most of his work is based in Montreal, but he visits his parents often. Last spring, he met Evren and me for the first time during Sunday brunch at Isolde's kitchen table. Evren looked at him for a moment, then walked over and handed him a plastic dinosaur toy. Leander smiled warmly and said, "I think that means I've been accepted." I laughed out loud. It was the first time in a long while that laughter came easily to me. I don't know exactly what the future will look like, and that's okay. I am not rushing to figure out every detail. What I do know is that for many years I lived in a situation where my exhaustion did not seem to matter. My fears were often ignored. My presence was expected, but my needs were not treated as important. I stayed because I kept hoping that the person I believed I married would return. But he never did. Eventually I understood something important. Hoping for a different past does not create a better future. So I want to say something to anyone who reads this story and feels like it sounds familiar. Feeling afraid during a crisis does not mean you are overreacting. Wanting a partner who shows up and helps you does not make you needy. When someone repeatedly chooses their own comfort instead of helping you when you truly need them, they are showing you what you mean to them. Believe what you see. You do not have to leave immediately. Life is complicated, and leaving can take time, resources, and courage. But start paying attention. Write things down. Talk to someone you trust. Remember that the law, at least here, is designed to protect you and your children. Family lawyers exist who help people in difficult marriages, and many offer first meetings that cost very little or nothing. You are not trapped, even when it feels that way. And there is one more thing I want to say. Someday Evren will read this story. I want him to understand that the night I sat alone beside his hospital crib, watching his small chest rise and fall while I waited for his fever to break, was the night everything became clear to me. That was the moment I knew exactly what kind of mother I wanted to be. That was the night I decided what kind of life I would build for both of us. Evren gave me that clarity. He was always the reason for everything.